Hello everyone and welcome to How to Have Extraordinary Relationships with me, your host Lucy Cavendish, love coach, author, podcaster, and today I'm very moved to be here with Katinka Blackford Newman. She's very kindly come on the podcast to talk about something that's so important. We're moving into issues here. How do we make life work? And Katinka is the founder and CEO of Antidepressant Risks. She's a London-based qualified life coach specialising in mental fitness, as well as a journalist, a published author, and a BBC-trained documentary filmmaker. So her interest in antidepressants began in 2012 when she nearly lost her life because of an adverse reaction to an antidepressant. She was hospitalized, she was prescribed more drugs which made her extremely ill and psychotic, and she ended up virtually taking her own life. And she has come on the podcast today to talk about her story and also to help other people if any of this is ringing true to you or any of the people you love. And it's a very generous story for her to share with us, so I hope you get a lot out of it. Welcome to How to Have Extraordinary Relationships with me, your host, Lucy Cavendish. And today on this special episode, under the Making Life Work banner, I'm here with Katinka Blackford Newman, who is going to tell us, she's very generously offered to tell us her story. And it's not really a story because it's the truth around what happened for her when the drugs don't work, when she took antidepressants. And then she's going to, please keep listening, because then she's going to go into what actually happened and how her life changed in a way that you'll all want to hear. So welcome, Katinka, and thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Lovely to be here, Lucy. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with what happened. I know that you take over because it's your story, and it's a big story.
It is a big story. So it was back in 2012. I was working as a documentary filmmaker. I'd been married for 12 years. It seemed to be a happy marriage, but looked at it from the outside, but from the inside, things weren't quite as they appeared. And so my marriage broke up. I had two children, Lily and Oscar. They were 10 and 11 at the time. And I coped pretty well. You know, I had already done some degree of self-development, and I was sort of like the poster woman for how to cope with a marriage breakup. I saw a therapist to deal with the sadness. I took up running. I was meditating. I was kind to my ex. I did everything. I did everything right. I started dating again. I did all the hobbies that I hadn't done before, and things were fine. So for 8 months, things were absolutely fine. My ex had moved out, and my presumption at the time was that he would let me keep our lovely Victorian home in West London. I think it said as much. And to my horror, 8 months later, he said that was not going to be the case, and that we were going to have to sell it. And I just went into a meltdown. I didn't know how to tell my kids that I was going to break my word, because I'd said, whatever happens, although mummy and daddy are separating, we will have this house that you were brought up in. And I just couldn't cope with telling them the truth, the fact that we were going to have to sell it. As well, there was my own personal loss around that, and losing the neighborhood that we were in. So I couldn't sleep. I did something which I regret, which is that I had some sleeping tablets for jet lag, Zopiclone sleeping tablets, and I started taking those, which was quite a stupid thing to do. And when they ran out, I went to my GP for more, and he said, well, I can give you one more, but no more than that. And then more sleepless nights. And I started to catastrophize at that point. I was like, oh God, my children are going to hate me, and oh, now I can't sleep, so I'm going to lose my job, and now we're going to be broke. And as well, I think I started to feel not so quite so confident about my new single life, that it was this time of year, it's September, we were going into autumn, and I was like, actually, maybe I can't cope with this, with being single. You know, I hadn't met the man of my dreams in the last 8 months, and I really started to kind of just think, Katinka, well, actually, you know, what have you done? Maybe this isn't such a great idea. You're not going to have the house, and so on and so forth. So doubts started crowding in, as they do when you're not sleeping. And then eventually I went to a private doctor and for more sleeping tablets. And he said, I can't give you a sleeping tablet, but I can give you an antidepressant, and that will help you sleep. And I'd also told him about the anxiety and so on and so forth. So his diagnosis was depression, which is something that that I've come to not really agree with, because actually looking back, it was a really normal reaction to a challenging life circumstance. The
Yeah.
week before, I wasn't depressed. The week before, I was playing tennis, going to festivals with my new friendship group, and so on and so forth. So the only thing that had changed was this. You know, I wouldn't be depressed the next day if somebody had said, well, you can keep the house. So it wasn't, I really disagree with that diagnosis of depression, because
Mm.
I was happy the week before. But anyway, what the hell did I care? He was giving me something, an antidepressant that he told me was actually going to help. It was going to make me sleep. And who knows, you know, it may have boosted my mood for all I knew. So
Mm.
anyway, what I didn't know then that I know now is that I'm one of the small percentage of people who have a really, really severe adverse reaction to antidepressants. There are a significant minority. It's a genetic thing.
Right.
So anyway, I took the one tablet and immediately I went into a toxic reaction, which continued, but I'd been told that I should keep taking them. So I probably took another two more doses as well as the Zopiclone sleeping tablets, but I couldn't sleep because my body had gone into intense toxicity.
Mm.
Then, after 2 nights of not sleeping and my body in this terrible toxicity, my mind went into a psychosis, which was as a direct result of the not of the adverse reaction and not sleeping. So it was the most terrifying psychosis. I mean, I can remember it as if it happened yesterday. It was literally, I was hallucinating. I
Right.
thought I thought I'd killed it was like a disjointed dream. I thought I'd killed the children. So I was running to the park trying to find them. Well, why was I trying to find them? Because I killed them. And then I was being filmed, and everything I was doing was being broadcast to the nation. And I was on this game show now where it was a competition between me and my ex as to who was the better parent, and everybody was voting. They were all ringing in and voting for him. So I was going to, I mean, it was the most awful, awful psychosis. So
Yeah.
you can imagine my children aged 10 and 11, they were like, oh, you know, what's happened? They call him my ex.
So you were at home with your
I
children,
was at home with my children.
and psychosis, what feels like, what, that you're having like hallucinatory dreams or.
Hallucinations. This is what I was hallucinating all the time. You know, I was literally, yeah, thinking that I'd killed the children, thinking that thinking that I was being filmed. I mean,
Mm.
just the most frightening. Well, it was when I say it was like a drug trip, it was a drug trip.
Yes.
So it wasn't like a drug trip, but it actually was that. So, but in the most terrifying thing that I have ever experienced in my entire life. So anyway, the children, they call my ex and my sister. My ex has private insurance, and so my sister drives me to a private hospital in London. And they admit me immediately. It's a Saturday night. They admit me. They sedate me. The next morning, I'm still in this psychosis because the citalopram antidepressant hadn't worn off.
Mm.
In my psychotic state, kind of realized it was the antidepressant that had caused this. So I said to the hospital staff, I don't want to take it anymore, because they sort of said, right, take your pills that your sister has brought in. So anyway, all that was fine. The next day, I wake up and I'm fine, because the effect of the drug, of the antidepressant that has caused the psychosis, has worn off.
Mm.
However, when I was psychotic, which was the day before, when the psychiatrist had come to interview me, I was crazy. So
Mm.
I'd said to him, oh, there's a suicide pact with God, that I need to kill myself so that Jeremy, my ex, can have the child. I mean, crazy stuff. And there are cameras in the ceiling. So anyway, the next day when I wake up and I'm okay, I'm fine because the pill has worn off, and I say, "Can I go home?" What do you think they say? Of course you're not going home.
Yes, you're suicidal. Yes.
You're suicidal, you were psychotic yesterday. They then have diagnosed psychotic depression. They never ever entertain the idea that it could have been the pill that caused the psychosis, right? Which it clearly was. Um, so anyway, that would have all been fine. There I am in one of London's most expensive hospitals, costing at that time, I think it was £6,000 a week. And it
Great.
would have all been fine. They come around with a nice sort of, kind of little timetable. It's yoga, group therapy, Pilates, lovely menu, etc., etc. All of that would have been fine were it not for the fact that, of course, what they then said is, well, we were going to give you more medication. So of course they gave me the medication, the same medication that had causes me to have an acute adverse reaction. It wasn't the identical antidepressant, but if you have a reaction to one SSRI antidepressant, they act on the serotonin system. It's likely that you're going to react badly to all of them. So immediately they give me the next drug, I go into a toxic adverse reaction. So this is like having a peanut allergy. It is unbelievably dangerous. So when you have that toxic reaction, that's what I know now because I'm an expert. Is you emit the sign that your body is going into toxicity is that you develop this condition called akathisia, which in Greek it means inability to sit still. You literally are like this.
Mm.
So, and it's that condition that can drive people to take their lives immediately because it's so agonizing. So, of course, they don't recognize that. What they're now diagnosing is she's got more anxious because she can't sit still in the group therapy sessions. I was literally unable to sit still. So they think that's anxiety. So anyway, to cut a long story short, over the course of the next year, they pile on more and more antidepressants,
Mm.
antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, everything. So none of which I can tolerate. And so at one point I'm on 7 different drugs, and I become kind of pretty much catatonic. I can't finish a sentence. I can't read a book. I can't watch a film. I can't. I can't think. I couldn't dress myself. I couldn't wash myself. I put on 4 stone because of one of the drugs called olanzapine, which is an antipsychotic. It makes you want to eat rapaciously. So I could not stop eating. So I put on 4 stone. Well, I'd started off at 8 stone, so that was like half my weight again.
Yes, yes, and you're tiny. You're a tiny thing.
And I lost everything. So I was in and out of that private hospital, them giving me more and more diagnosis. Oh, she's bipolar, let's give her lithium. Psychotic depression, treatment resistant depression. All the time I knew it was the drugs, but I was their prisoner. And even when I was let out, so throughout the course of the year, it was in and out. So I was let out, but I was let out on a cocktail of drugs. I couldn't just go, I'm just binning them all because I was being forced to take them. And also it would have been, I would have got worse before I got better kind of thing. You can't just do that, although that in the end is kind of like what happened in the end, which I'll come to. So in the course of that time, I moved out of the family home because I saw the distress that it was causing my children. So even though I could barely make a rational decision, one day I literally left the house, went to an estate agent, and I said I need to rent a flat, and I had a credit card, and I put down the deposit to rent a flat because I just couldn't bear the distress on my children's face as they saw their mother descend into total madness.
Mm.
So as well, to counteract the effects of the drugs, I'd been a keep fit fanatic, but I started smoking rapaciously, like 70 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
Being a teetotaler, I was drinking to try and combat the side effects of the drugs. I've never really drunk before. So they'd seen their mother go from a kind of like really competent filmmaker, traveling around the world, keep fit fanatic, non-drinker, to a very overweight, chain smoking, drinking, dribbling, because that was the effect that the drugs were having on me. Shaking like this from the effects of the drug. And it was just, and I could feel nothing at all because of the emotional numbing, which was kind of like of the drugs. And even through my drug hazed sort of inability to feel, I could still see the effects that it was having on my children. And I remember I'd managed to get myself to my son's sports day. And so I was sitting there dribbling, chain smoking. And I remember one of his friends said, "Is that your mum?" And he was 11 years old, and he was just like, and he said, "No." He said, "No." I mean, he couldn't bear it. It was just awful to see the sadness on my children's face, and not be able to do anything. It was like being, that one of those dreams where you just can't wake up, you can't get back into yourself. It was like that a lot of the time. So anyway, so that went on for exactly a year. And then the thing that actually saved my life was actually not having enough money, funnily enough. So on my final readmission to the hospital, I was nearly psychotic again, but from the effects of the drugs. So it was exactly a year ago, so later, so September 2013. I rang my brother in despair. The akathisia, the inability to sit still, was so bad that I was literally walking around the streets of London at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, trying to get rid of the effects of these drugs. I rang my brother in despair. Please, said, do anything, do anything. So I'm, readmitted to the private hospital again, and I'm put on suicide watch. In the notes, it says that I'm psychotic again. In the notes as well, it says that I now have a condition called tardive dyskinesia, which is caused by antipsychotics. It's basically brain damage. So I'm literally dribbling at this point. That's the outer symptoms. And so I'm too ill to get out of bed. And then the psychiatrist comes in and he says, "I'm terribly sorry, but you have to leave." I was like, "Oh, right." Yeah. And he goes, "The insurance has run out.
Oh my
You've
God.
used it all up. £50,000 worth of insurance has been used up." He said, "That's it. That's it. And, we've spoken to you might want to delete this, but you've spoken to your ex. He's not going to pay. No one, he wasn't. I mean, it's expensive. It's like £6,000 a week." And clearly they weren't helping. But anyway, so I was discharged into the community then. So then I'm back in this little flat in Notting Hill. The children won't come visit me. They cry if they ever come near me. So they won't visit me. I hadn't watched a film. I didn't have the ability to watch a film, read a book, hadn't for a year. There was no hope in my view of ever getting better. So trigger warning, everybody. So I decide to take my life. Effectively, that's it. I've got nothing to live for. There's no way out. I'm in physical and mental agony from these drugs. I'm on 7 or 8 of them, and there's no hope. So I decide to end my life. And then something stops me. And the thing that stops me, and so I will remember it to the day I die. But I look in the mirror, and my face is all bloated from the drugs. And I don't see myself as an adult looking back. Who I see looking back is myself as a 12-year-old child. So I had lost my dad to suicide at the age of 12. And my daughter Lily was also, at that time, she was then 12. And I just thought, my God, how is she going to cope if I take my life? How can she ever not make it about her, that her mother didn't love her enough? Would she ever be able to say, oh, actually, it was because of the drugs, or, even, she may have thought it was depression or whatever. How could she not make it about herself?
Mm.
And so that was the thing that stopped me from taking my life that day. And so I spoke to, when the community worker came in, because I had community workers having to look after me, make sure I took the medication that was obviously making me ill. They didn't know that. So I turned to her and I said, look, I'm really ill. You need to take me to hospital. So she took me to St. Charles Hospital in West London. And I just remember I just knew I had to be sectioned, that I had to get myself sectioned. And I knew that there are words that you say to get that mean they have to detain you. And the words are, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
So I said those words, and sure enough, I was detained, sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And they took the most extraordinary, unusual, and actually, if I'm honest, highly dangerous step of detoxing me off all of the drugs. They took me off all of them. They said, we're going to take you off all of this lot and then start again. So they took me off all of the 7 I was on. They had a couple of drugs that they had, that they're new drugs that they put me on, but their idea was that they were going to take me off and then start again. So I went into horrendous cold turkey. I know now what they did was incredibly dangerous. I couldn't, I just, I just screamed for many weeks, 2, 3, well, altogether it was 4 weeks. They didn't understand that I was suffering intense withdrawal, agonizing withdrawal from the drugs. And then something miraculous happened, which is that I woke up 4 weeks later and I was better. I was completely better.
Wow.
I looked in the mirror. I was like, who is this?
Wow. Oh my
Who
God.
is this person? What the hell has happened? And I was able to just go, it all started a year ago with this taking this drug and da, 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 da. And it was the first time I was just capable of having of actual rational thought, of actually being able to sit down and actually think, or whatever. But anyway, my background was as an investigative journalist, and I Googled antidepressant side effects. It all came up that
Mm.
if you have an adverse reaction, you become suicidal, psychotic, in some instances, actually violent, homicidal. So anyway, I made a phone call which changed the course of my career, I suppose, and it was to the world's leading expert on antidepressants, a man called Professor David Healy, who has written many books and has been an expert witness in many cases involving antidepressants. And I said, is it possible that, I took this drug a year ago, and I went into this psychosis. Could it be the drug? And he said to me the words that I would never forget. He said, you are lucky that you didn't kill yourself or your children or both, because that's what happens when people go into an antidepressant induced psychosis. And those words stuck with me. And at the time, I had to get myself out of hospital. I had to get my kids back. I had to find them a home. I had to do all of these things, but I couldn't forget that conversation. I
Mm.
just couldn't forget that conversation. And so then I went on this journey of discovery, a journalistic journey of discovery. But also, I suppose it was a personal journey as well, because I needed to understand what had happened to me. And what I discovered was extraordinary, which is that drug companies have known for many years that this can happen, that there were people on the initial trials of Prozac that took their lives, but they didn't show up in the data because they didn't complete the trial. That shortly after Prozac had come out, there were just many, many lawsuits against Prozac for people who had become suicidal. That there have been many cases around the world where where judges have ruled that people have taken their lives, other people's lives, as a result of antidepressants, an adverse reaction to an antidepressant. So I compiled all of that information, and basically I wrote a book which was a combination of my story and all the research that I had found. And I suppose one of the most amazing, personal discoveries that I made is that, as I shared earlier, my dad had took his life when I was 12, which we had all thought was suicide, which we had all thought was depression. Looking back, he was on antidepressants. He was on an anti-smoking drug, which works on the serotonin system. The inability to tolerate medication goes through generations. And so it made me reframe his suicide as possibly drug related, because he was the mirror image of me when I was suffering side effects of the drugs. So it made me think about that. And since then, I've had a genetic test, which you can have genetic tests, and it came back clearly, that I can't tolerate that type of drugs. So my kids know to never ever take anything like that, because it's so likely that they will have suffered that. So anyway, the book came out. It was made into, the research from that was made into a panorama, which was about the link between antidepressants and violence. And there we go. That's part one of the story.
I've got so many questions. So if you don't want to answer anything, just let me know. You had obviously people around you, and this is not about blame. Were they, I mean, why didn't anyone step in and go, this is not Katinka, there's something clearly going on? Or is it that we don't know enough about this, so we don't know, we think the experts are right?
Yeah, it's such a good question. If you're in a hospital that is charging £6,000 a week, people think that the experts must know. They have to, the more, you're paying all of that money, they must know. So when experts kept on saying, when the psychiatrist said, no, this is depression, or this is psychotic depression, or this is bipolar, or whatever, people believed it. So interestingly, the less sophisticated the person was around me, the more likely it was that there were people who would say it's the drugs. So, for example, my son, my 10-year-old son, he always said, I think it's the drugs. I think it's the medication. It was the people who I don't know how to say this in a way that doesn't sort of sound snobby, but like our nanny, for example, she was just like, it's obviously the drugs.
I know what you mean, and it's hard to say. Well, do you know what I think? I think it's something to do with authority.
Yes, it's to do with authority. I mean, certainly my family, they were amazing. They came and visited me. They did everything. But they were being told by experts that I had depression and that the drugs were helping. And it was just like the emperor's got no clothes, I suppose. It was almost impossible for people to believe that you could be paying that much money and that these people who are expert psychiatrists could be completely wrong, and that actually the cure that they were offering was the cause of the illness. Not only was it not treating it, it was actually entirely causing the treatment. It was iatrogenic, which means caused by the treatment. And so I suppose the other thing to say is that when I thought, oh gosh, I must be the only person this has happened to. When I came out and published my book and then was on TV and so on and so forth, I was inundated by people to whom the same thing had happened. And it was for that I then went on and I set up a not-for-profit called Antidepressant Risks, where I am literally, it takes up, about a third of my working, time, because I'm inundated with people for whom the same thing happens. Happens even more in the States, where people are more medicated than we are even. But my God, there are nearly 9 million people on antidepressants. A lot of 1 in 100 become suicidal, according to drug company data. So that's probably a conservative estimate. And they have side effects for more than those 1 in 100. There are an awful lot of people who suffer side effects and who become very, very, very ill as a result of these drugs. I'm not the only one. And always when I deal with people, it's like, well, no, they're not believed a lot of the time. They're not believed by their family. They're not often not believed by their GPs. That's becoming better now. It's becoming more publicized that these drugs can cause these side effects. It was back in 2012. There was nothing on the internet. There's now, the internet is now teeming with Facebook groups of people who have suffered, teeming with it, but that was not the case at the time. So no, nobody, very, very few people clocked it.
Because it's a terrible place to be. I mean, it's terrible. You go from being this journalist, as soon as you come around, you set off an investigation and pan around, and you've got a 10-year-old who can clearly see, interestingly enough, that was my mummy. Then she took a pill, and now she's not my mummy. It's sort of that clear to him, isn't it? You were this
Yeah.
person, you went on that, and now you're not my mummy anymore. You're turned into a different mummy. And he sees it very clearly.
Yeah.
But, and in the psychosis and throughout this, did you get, because a lot of the psychosis feels like fear, but fear that's gone huge. I'm going to lose my children. It's a competition. I've lost the house. I've messed everything up. I'm going to be on my own. It sort of explodes, doesn't it, into this sort of psychotic fear. Did you get therapy in this time? Was it useful? I mean, where were the people going?
Well, to be honest, yeah, I mean, there was wall-to-wall therapy at the private hospital. You can't imagine, you couldn't move for therapy.
Okay, it didn't help.
Well, I was, I was drugged. So I was suffering, imagine, um, I couldn't think, I couldn't sit still. I was being drugged by more drugs that were making me ill that had caused the psychosis. So no amount of therapy could have helped. But the question you ask about psychosis is a fascinating one, and one that I've looked at since then. And it's interesting because people have different types of psychosis caused by different types of drugs. So an antidepressant induced psychosis, it always involves the same thing. It's a sort of paranoia about harming people. There's you hallucinate about harming yourself or others and quite often do it. Whereas other types of psychosis, apparently, I haven't experienced it, but a cannabis-induced psychosis, apparently rather lovely. It's rather religious and rather calming and rather wonderful. Um, so people who have psychosis from ADHD drugs, again, very different, very alarming, frightening, quite often ends in violence. So different substances involve different psychoses. And I've interviewed a lot of people who've had antidepressant induced psychosis, and it's the same kind of paranoia that they have harmed somebody.
Yes, yes. So there's the moment when you think, that's it. There's nothing to live for. You've lost your children, you've lost your job, you're rattling around like a pill bottle. What stops you is this, and I'm so sorry to hear about your father, what happened with your father, and you don't want to visit that on your daughter. You now think actually there's a genetic thing. So let's get to part two. You've kind of somehow they've gone cold turkey, dangerous, very dangerous, as I can imagine. But 4 weeks down the line, you wake up and you think, gosh, I'm back.
Yeah, I think, gosh, I'm back, and I think, gosh, not only am I back, but I now know something that I can't forget, which is that there is a pill that millions of people are taking around the world that I know with 100% certainty caused me to go into a psychosis and nearly take my life, and throughout the year caused me to be suicidal as well.
Mm.
And I sort of felt a personal responsibility as well that, gosh, I survived this. And, I've gone on to discover that a lot of people don't survive it. They take their lives. So there was this responsibility that I had at the back of my mind. And as well, remember, I came out of that. Nobody believed me that it was the drugs.
Oh.
Nobody. Why
Mm.
would they? Nobody knew at that time, or wasn't particularly well known. As far as everybody was concerned, I'd had some kind of catastrophic breakdown and magically recovered. Probably they thought because of the drugs that I got better.
Yes.
People didn't know the ins and outs. So it was very frustrating at the time. And I think also part of my passion to research it and to prove it with 100% certainty, write a book, get the book, the book was serialized. I wanted the rubber stamp of approval. My motivation as well was that wanted my children to know with 100% certainty that that what happened could never happen to me again. That I hadn't just suddenly just lost the plot, that had been caused by a drug. And I think at the beginning of my book, I dedicate it to my children, and I say, I will never ever be taken away from you like I was unless somebody slips some Prozac into my drink, because that is the only thing that could happen that would cause me to be crazy again. So I had to prove to them that that it was the drugs that had caused it. So that was part of my motivation as well. So anyway, I came out. I immediately got a job working back in. I mean, the transformation was extraordinary. Literally, I came out of hospital. I think I got a job in the last bit of hospital. So they kept me there for a few weeks after I'd got better, which I was fine about, because actually I needed a bit of breathing space, because all of my emotions were coming back at that time. Suddenly, I could hear, listen to music and be moved for the first time in a year. I was able to read a book. I was able to watch a TV program. It was like a rebirth in a sense. And I started running. So that was wonderful. I had been training for a half marathon, so I got a job. I started running. I ran a half marathon shortly afterwards, and raised money for a charity which was run by David Healy, who was the author who writes about antidepressant induced suicidality and violence. So I raised a whole load of money, and then I rented a house, because I was determined the children would have a proper Christmas, and I couldn't bear to go back to that kind of like horrible flat. And I had a hell of a job, with the divorce, of course, because of course my ex thought, well, she's mad, I'll have the kids in the house, thank you very much.
Right.
So there was a lot
Yes.
going on in the personal sphere of just getting my life back. But within a very short amount of time, I was back directing films. I was, had Christmas with the children. I'd lost all the weight. I was, back training for a half marathon. So I was back very, very quickly, but a changed person, because I knew this thing. And I had a responsibility to get that out there. I just needed to do that.
And do your children understand? Did they understand? It must have been very frightening for them. I'm sure. I'm very frightening for you, obviously.
They totally understood, because I took them on the journey with me. And I remember we had in this rented house, we had this huge bed, right? And of course, because they'd lost their mum for a year, they insisted on sleeping with me, age, 11 and 12. And I remember we would just read these books about people who'd gone on similar, about the, side effects of antidepressants. Or we watched, there are a few films out there, and there are a few biographies, and we went on the journey together. So my children know more about the side effects of psychiatric drugs than most medics. They're absolute experts, and they totally got it and understood. And also I interviewed a number of people for the book that I sort of became friends with, and they kind of like came and stayed or whatever. So they met these people who had lost their children or whatever to antidepressant induced suicide. So they became involved in that. So they 100% knew that it was the drugs. 100% they knew, and they understood.
So what you said to me was that actually what's come out of this? What's come out of this that you said you have an extraordinary relationship with yourself. So,
I do, actually. So people always say to me, they say, Well, I mean, first to say is I went back and I worked as a filmmaker and I had many successful years, but this cause became more and more important to me, having the book come out
Mm,
and then starting a not-for-profit and becoming involved with that. And, that it does a lot now. We run support groups for people and we host events and so on and so forth. And I write for newspapers about prescription harm.
mm,
So I'm very lucky I've got a platform to talk about this. But people say to me, well, what would you have? And, by the way, I'm not anti-medication at all. I'm pro-informed choice. I just want people to understand the risks.
yeah. Yes, I understand.
So people say to me, well, what would you have done differently back in 2012 when you had to sell the family home and so on and so forth? Because as I said to you, I was doing it all right. I was seeing a therapist. I was doing the kind of, the exercise and the big, great social life connection. I was doing it all right, all okay. So what would I have done differently? And the truth is, at the time, I couldn't have done it differently because I didn't have the tools that I have now. Because now I have a mental toolkit that would not enable me to go into that spiral of catastrophizing.
Mm,
So as well, I now don't work as a filmmaker. I work as a life coach. I retrained and I work as a life coach, helping um, people get unstuck. So I was stuck at the time. I couldn't be stuck in that way anymore because my thought processes at the time were faulty. I didn't realize what I know now, which obviously, which is that that there are facts and there are beliefs, and there are empowering beliefs and there are disempowering beliefs. So my beliefs at the time were that my children won't there are words that I never say to myself. So at the time I would be thinking I can't cope. I can't handle this. My
mm,
children will hate me. My children will, grow up. They won't be able to cope with moving to a different neighborhood. And then on top of that, there were more catastrophizing thoughts like, "Oh, I'll be single for the rest of my life and I'll die an hopeless old spinster
mm,
with
mm.
20 cats or whatever." There were those
Yeah.
familiar catastrophizing thoughts
Mm,
that I simply don't allow myself to have anymore. I just have an empowering mindset, which is what I teach to people, which I'm sure is what you teach to people. And our thoughts are become our reality. And it's a big, big, big piece of self-development, isn't it? To realize that actually thoughts create feelings, feelings create actions. I would not allow myself to have those thoughts of, I can't cope, I can't handle this. I would have different thoughts. I can deal with anything.
yes.
I can adapt. Although I feel sad now, I know that this feeling will pass. I'm okay. I'm safe with feeling sadness. This won't last forever.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, what I say to people is actually, what is the bottom, what is the deepest fear? What's at the bottom of it? And then you're asking yourself, is it actually true? Okay, I lose the house. Is it actually true that I'm going to be blah, 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 blah? So, because once you have that, once you really name your deepest fear, and that's hard, then you have the fear and the fear doesn't have you. And that's the major, major thing.
It is such a shift. And I catch myself every day and I'm able to just change my thought process.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Before, fear was in the driving seat of my life in many different ways. I was very capable and coped very well, but it was a sort of house of cards, really,
Yeah.
that I just didn't have those coping mechanisms of being able to get through fear. I would catastrophize and think about things that just never came true, and they didn't come true. Of course, a year later we had a far more difficult situation of not only having to sell the house, but of course, there was a whole lot more that had got way worse. But it was all fine. We moved to a different neighborhood. My children have grown up wonderful, balanced kids. They're 22 and 23. They've got both got first-class degrees. They both got great jobs.
Mm. Mm.
They cope fine with us moving to a smaller house into a less posh neighborhood. We survived.
Yeah, of course, because there's a lot work. Yeah. It's us that we're worried about. They're fine. You can live in a paper bag in the middle of the road and kids will be fine.
Well, actually, I was fine as well. I
Yeah.
was fine. And actually, I created a life that, if I'm honest, I mean, you've been through a breakup, a marriage breakup. You know, there are a lot of lovely things about a marriage, aren't there? There's this,
Yeah,
the
yeah. Yes.
home and the so on and so forth. And I'm single now, and you know, I have to say that it has challenges, but my life is kind of wonderful in many, many different ways that it wasn't when I was married. And you know, I have a lot to be grateful for, and my life is very exciting and fulfilling on many, many different levels. So actually, it's been a really good thing for me.
Good. So let's just have a you've got your book that's available on Amazon. Tell us the name of the book again in case people
It's called The Pill That Steals Lives.
know
One
it's still
woman's
alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one woman's terrifying journey to discover the truth about antidepressants.
So that's
So it's on
available.
Amazon. It depends when your episode is going out. It's just going into reprint, so there's a little hiatus at the moment.
Okay,
You
but you
won't be
can
able to
get
get it for another few weeks.
Katinka, you also have a podcast.
Yes, so I have a podcast called the Med Free Mental Fitness Podcast,
Mm.
where I don't just talk to people about psychiatric drugs. I talk about med-free alternatives to all sorts of
Yeah,
things.
really interesting actually. So that you've got I had a look at that. There are lots of people on. So very interesting if people want to not take meds because they're worried about it. As you said, you're not against people taking meds, but it's about information,
It's
getting
about information and it's about alternatives and about people having an informed choice that this is what the drugs do, this is what they don't do, or this
yes,
is what they can do.
yes.
And if you don't, and here are some alternatives.
You also working as a mental fitness coach and a life coach. So how can people find you?
So I have a website. It is www.kbnlifecoaching.co.uk.
And people can find you there and
You
you're
can find me there, or you can find me at katinka@kbnlifecoaching.co.uk.
so, I mean, I'm sure lots of questions. So if people want to reach out to Katinka, that's very easy. But thank you so much. That's an incredible story. It's very moving, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people, not just because of the reaction to the drugs, but just because when we go through really difficult stuff, we go to very difficult places,
And
and
we don't have to.
yeah, and sometimes we don't really know how to get out of those places. And I think that's what you're really highlighting. Sometimes, going to the doctor and being given a pill might not be the best thing for us to do.
Sometimes it might not. Just be aware of what can happen, what the side effects are, what they can do and what they can't do.
Yeah, yeah. So
Just be informed. Oh, and so the other thing to say, Lucy, if you don't mind me
mm,
putting this, is that I run a not-for-profit, which is called antidepressantrisks.org. So if you want more information about the side effects of antidepressants, the pros and the cons, we have the largest virtual library ever of books and films about antidepressants. We have a whole list of resources and organizations that can help people. Antidepressantrisks.org.
thank you so much. And thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
And thank you so much for having me, Lucy. I've so enjoyed it. It's been such a lovely, lovely chat.